How would you describe a moose to someone who's never ever seen a moose before? This past month, I was reading a 2013 edition of Mosaic magazine. Mosaic is the magazine put out by Canadian Baptist Ministries, of which we are a part, and it was talking about the very first mission trip that happened between Canada and Cuba through Canadian Baptist Ministries. Since then, we've gone on several mission trips to Cuba from our own church, but this was the first church to go. It was a group of youth and leaders from Welland, Ontario, and they traveled all the way down to Cuba to take part in ministry with the feedback churches. Now, the enthusiasm of both the students and the leaders and those that were in Cuba already really cut through any of the language barriers that were there. But the really comedic roadblock came up when youth from Welland tried to describe to youth from Cuba what a moose is. Now, and they were trying to do this without having any pictures, but how would you even start? How would you even begin to describe what a moose is to someone who's never ever seen one before? Depending on who you ask, a moose is either really majestic or really homely. Depending on who you ask, a moose can look and be super dopey, or it can be exceptionally dangerous. Cuba has no large animals to speak of. You couldn't say a moose is like a large deer because in Cuba there are no deer. There's no large animals like that. There's absolutely no frame of reference to describe a moose based on the same animals or the animals that a Cuban would have within their own country. There are cows in Cuba, but a domesticated cow is really nothing like a moose whatsoever. And so the idea of a moose walking freely among the coniferous trees of Canada would be an unimaginable concept. And even if you think about how you would explain what a moose is to someone else, it's like some fantastical imaginary animal. To people outside of our borders, you may as well be describing a Canadian unicorn. It seems outlandish, it seems made up. You certainly can't use songs to describe a moose to someone. I know when I worked at summer camp, we had a campfire song about moose, and it went like, there was a great big moose. He liked to drink a lot of juice. I mean, what use is that? That's not very helpful in describing what a moose is. So through the barrier of language, with no visual aids, with no point of reference, how do you describe a moose to someone who has never, ever seen a moose? And how do you do this without sounding like you have completely lost your mind? Now, take this puzzle a giant step forward. How would you describe God to someone through barriers of culture or lack of common experience or no visual aids or no previous point of reference? Where would you even begin? How do you describe a divine being to someone with no point of reference for them to go on? This is the challenge facing Moses when he asks Moses to lead the Israelites. Moses barely knows God as it is. How is he supposed to describe God to people that he is supposed to lead? In Exodus 3, God shares who God is with Moses and then shares how Moses is to describe God to the Israelites. A key word in Exodus 3 in explaining who God is the word I. The use of the personal pronoun I by Moses and by God within this passage is very significant. It's very over the top. It happens over and over again in unusual frequency. The tiny word I will show who God is in a very immense sort of way. Now, all our lives, we've been told there's no I in team, but there certainly is an I in Exodus chapter 3. Many of us are used to the idea of a personal God, of a very personal and nearby God that is with us and sees us, and all of those kinds of concepts. The idea of God being personal and near would not have been a prominent thought in Moses' day. It wouldn't have been a prominent thought to the people. In the minds of many, God was distant. God was to be feared. The idea that God was near and available was preposterous. And so making the tiny word I key in this passage, in this interaction between Moses and God, is a very immense thing. This mysterious God gets Moses' attention in an unmistakable way. Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. So here is our first I sighting in Exodus chapter 3. Moses says, I will go over and see this strange sight. And also, I find this kind of humorous because it really feels like we've lost something in translation here. In Moses' experience of the event, which seems incredible, seeing this burning bush that is not consumed, to hear him say, I will go over and see this strange sight, seems like a very subdued reaction to a very, very unusual thing. In verse 4 we read, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And again, Moses responds with an I statement. He says, here I am. Although this bush that burns is not consumed, is otherworldly, this is a very personal engagement with God. God sees Moses, God calls Moses over by name, and Moses responds, here I am. God is near and God is personal, but also God is completely other. Moses is told to remove his shoes because he is on holy ground. And Moses responds by covering his face and just being very much in awe of the situation. But God also shares a deep connection that Moses already has with God, even if Moses didn't know that that connection already existed. God says, I am the God of your father. I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. These are the vital people in Moses' history. His own father, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. These are, with the exception of his own father, these are the important people in the history of Israel. And so this God is speaking to Moses out of the bush and speaking out as a historically significant being. This God has roots through all the generations that have preceded Moses. Now, as is communicated through the book of Exodus, God is also a personal God who sees. The God who sees is a very important concept that we're going to see all throughout the book of Exodus. And so this is what God says about what he has seen of the people of Israel. I have indeed seen the misery of the people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I am concerned about their suffering. The Israelites have been in slavery in Egypt for a very, very long time now. Their misery has endured for a very long time now. Any time that we have a faith that we hold on to and we go through long periods of suffering, what do we ask? We ask questions like, why doesn't God care? Doesn't God see me? Doesn't God know what I am going through? Doesn't God want to do something about this? All of these seem like they would be really reasonable questions for the Israelites to ask in this situation. And God lets Moses know he has seen the Israelites and what they have been going through. He lets them know, I have seen their misery. I have heard their pain. I am concerned. And this is a genuine concern. This is, well, quite often when we say someone is concerned, it's a dismissive thing. It's something that maybe they just want the question to go away and say it's a concern of theirs. This is genuine concern. This is the real thing that God has, a real concern that God has for his people. This is a God who truly sees, who truly knows what's happening to his people, and he is truly engaged. God's personal interaction with the people does not stop at concern or empathy. God has a plan of action. God has a plan to rescue. He says, I have come to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land. God is moving them from their current place of captivity and their current place of misery and moving them to something of freedom that will be their own. And this is the God that is often mistaken as distant and uninvolved, but clearly is not distant and uninvolved here. This is the God that says he will come down to rescue them and bring them up to a new land. Again, God sees. I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them, but God doesn't just see, God will act and God will rescue. God is personal, God is attentive, God is active. And God will do all of this saving in spectacular fashion. And God doesn't necessarily need help in making these things happen, but he certainly is not doing this alone. He gets Moses involved. He says, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Now, Moses does not agree with this plan. He says, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Moses has serious doubts, and of course he does. What qualifications does Moses have? He's been away from his people in Egypt for decades. He's just really meeting God. He's a shepherd. He's no leader. He's no speaker. Who am I? God responds to Moses' protest. He says, I will be with you. What Moses has in a lack of qualifications, God responds with his promised presence. And we see this a few times in Moses' interaction with God. Moses will say, well, who am I? And God says, I will provide. I will do these things for you. I will intervene. God responds that God will make this happen or will help in this story. God will fully equip Moses for the task at hand. God even gives a sign that he will be with Moses. God says, and this will be a sign to you that is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Now, when I read this recently, I laughed out loud when I read it, because the sign that God is giving is, here is the sign that I have sent you. When this impossible job is complete, this is the sign that I've sent you, right? Like it's not like there's a sign, like something ahead of time where God says, see, I'm with you. I'm going to be with you in this. It's when the job is over, that's when you'll know I am with you. And as far as signs go, it doesn't necessarily seem like a very encouraging one, but the thing is that God is really promising his presence and promising his power. And he is calling Moses to follow, and he is calling Moses to obey. This is the sign that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. So God may even be saying, this won't fully make sense until it is over, and you just have to trust me. And that is what he is calling Moses to do. Well, of course, Moses has more concerns, wouldn't you? He has no credibility with these people. He says, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? Moses is having to describe a moose to a Cuban. He is having to credibly say that God has sent him and explain exactly who this God is. What can he possibly offer that says, I have a credible mission from a credible God? Well, this seems to be where the entire chapter has been heading. How can you describe God who speaks, but also God that shows up in mysterious things like burning bushes, or seems to be absent for centuries? How do you describe this God to someone? Well, this is what God says for Moses to tell the people. God says, tell them, I am who I am. This is what you were to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. This name, I am that I am, or I am who I am, seems to say nothing and everything all at once. It seems vague, but it's the name that this entire passage has been building towards. And the I am who I am covers everything that Moses has encountered so far. I am who I am covers everything about God's past history with the Israelites. Say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. Go assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, I have watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt. Though I am who I am has a history with the Israelite people, God is very much present right now. God has watched, God has seen, God cares. God is this immeasurable God who lives outside of history and yet has been very historically involved with the people, especially through Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. He's exceptionally present also with the Israelites right now. God goes on, I have promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt into a land flowing with milk and honey. I am who I am is working toward their future. God will rescue and lead them from a temporary land of misery to a permanent land of promise. I am who I am is entirely active in that process. God lays out the things that God is going to do, and he lays out things that are unmistakable, that it is his hand at work doing these things. He says, I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I perform among them. I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed toward this people, so that when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. I am who I am will do this with might and power and in spectacular fashion. I am who I am will manipulate things in such a way that it is unmistakable that he has done it. And so God's name, I am who I am, covers all these essential things about a transcendent and personal God. The name is important. God is in the present tense. He has no beginning. He has no end. He simply is. He is an all-encompassing God that his name cannot fully describe all that he represents. So we have this sense that I am who I am barely scratches the surface in really discussing who God is, and yet it seems to say everything all at once. So who is I am who I am? I am the God of previous generations. I am the God that sees your misery, crying, and suffering. I am the God that is concerned. I am the God that rescues you. I am the God that sends you. I am the God that will be with you. I am the God that will make these things happen. In a book I read of Mike Yaconelli's, he tells a story of I am who I am at work. A friend of his had experienced very significant tragedy and loss in his life, very devastating things. And this person had given their life to following the Lord, to serving God, and yet they had gone through all these things. And so this person ended up in a position very much like the Israelites, wondering, doesn't God see? Doesn't God know what has happened? Doesn't God intervene at all? And so, having given his life to serve God and experiencing all these losses and hurts, he was in a very, very bitter place. And so a number of his peers suggested that he go on a spiritual retreat. One of the assignments on the spiritual retreat was to go outside for a few hours and to observe everything in nature and think of how it reminds you of God and think of what truths about God that it points to. Well, this guy was so bitter, he refused to look at anything in nature. In fact, he was going to look at everything that was fabricated instead. If it was concrete or brick or metal, that is where he was going to give his attention. So he goes on this walk very angry, very determined not to give God the time of day. Well, he comes back from this exercise very rejuvenated. And it's very mysterious. Like, how can this guy end up so bitter at the start and come back very rejuvenated? Well, it turns out as he looked at the concrete in front of him on the ground, determined to look at nothing but the concrete, he kept seeing grass and weeds and flowers poking up through the concrete. The natural world had just forced itself in through these concrete barriers, these things that had been paved over. And so he saw these things very prominently in his attention. He tried to look away from it. He could not. And for him, it was a reminder that I am who I am was with him. Just as the natural world, as the grass and the weeds poked through the concrete and even pushed it aside, he was aware that even in his misery, even in his suffering, God was relentlessly present and God was relentlessly there. God truly was, I am who I am. God was the God that sees. God is present. God is faithful. God is rescuing. So hold on to this name. Hold on to the name, I am who I am. And follow and obey this God, knowing that you are sent by this God, and knowing that this God also equips you to do the things he's called you to do. God truly is, I am who I am. He's the faithful God of history who sees us in our present reality. He's working towards our future rescue, and he sends us and equips us as that rescue comes about. Let's pray together. Jesus, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the good God that you are to us. We thank you for the ways in which you are so faithful that we can see your hand at work in our lives and also the generations that have gone before us, that we can know that even if it feels like you're far away, we can know that because of who you are very present with us and that you see us and know and you care. And we thank you also that you don't just see these things and you don't just intervene, but you call us as well. You, just like you had Moses work with you, you have us work with you as well. You call us to do things. And even if we don't know the end product that's going to come about from working with you, we know that you faithfully call us and expect us to follow, trusting in you. Help us to rise up and to do those things. We're grateful for the God that you are. We're grateful for the hope that you give us, even in hard times. Thank you for being I am who I am. In Jesus' name, amen.